My name's Brenna Posey. I'm an OCD team member, and today we have Stuart Ralph with us. He's a dear partner and friend of NOCD. We love him, and I'm gonna hand it off to Stuart to introduce himself, and he's gonna chat about his OCD story and, you know, his how he founded the NOCD Stories, the podcast, and everything. So we're so excited to have you guys here. We're so excited to have Stuart with us. So without further ado, I'm gonna hand it off to Stuart.
Brilliant. Thanks for everyone. Thanks everyone for attending. And yeah, thanks, Brenna. And yeah, it's not often I get to talk for a long period of time in this sort of capacity. Usually, I'm interviewing people on my podcast, so it's always uncomfortable for me. But let's do it. So, my story. It's been a while since I've told it. I always miss bits, but I'll give you in the time we have a nice little succinct rundown so you get to know me a bit better and maybe what led me to do the OCD stories and become a therapist, which is my day job now. So yeah, my OCD story began. Um, my earliest memory was actually in America. So I live in the UK, in Surrey, the county of Surrey, and I was 7, and I was on holiday in Florida at Disney World, Disneyland. I always forget which is which. And it was an amazing holiday. And I know that because it was the first time me and my brother didn't argue for 2 weeks because we were I don't know, engaged in everything that was going on. But I remember the day we landed was afternoon or something like that. We got to the hotel, motel, whatever it was, and I'm eating dinner with my mum, my brother in like a Wendy's or a Denny's or something like that. And my dad was in the hotel because he was ill. So I guess it was jet lag or something like that. And I just kept getting these, at the time, felt like premonitions. It felt like I was seeing what was happening or the future. And it was a tarantula kind of crawling at my dad while he was laying in bed and it was going to bite him, kill him. I was having this, what I felt was a premonition that, I should tell my mum and I could save my dad. I didn't tell her, obviously, because just, I guess something in me felt maybe this can't be true. But emotionally, now what I know is it's anxiety. As a 7-year-old kid, especially, 30 odd years ago, we didn't really, I guess anxiety wasn't really talked about with kids that much. It wasn't something I was aware of. So it just felt like doom, I guess. And I didn't say anything. Got back to the hotel room. He obviously wasn't dead. Um, and yeah, and then the next thing on that holiday again was being in the pool. It was Florida in June, so it was humid as hell, super hot, just sweating profusely for 2 weeks. Um, and as a 7-year-old, I want to be in the swimming pool. But I remember as soon as I got in the swimming pool, my brain would I'd just be bombarded by these intrusive images of, sharks were literally a meter away, about to eat me, about to bite me. And I remember jumping in the pool from one corner to the other. So I was in the water for like 2 meters, and then I would sprint out, get far away from the edge, and that's basically how I used the swimming pool. Because I was so terrified of of sharks, which sounds silly now, but even if I go swimming now in swimming pools, sometimes my brain will give me those images, but now I know to kind of keep swimming. Tell my brain, good, I hope I get eaten. All of this stuff, so that bring it on, and then they go away. So that's kind of how it started, and then it morphed. My next key memory was when I was like 9. I used to have to cross thresholds back and forth, like through doorways or past old objects were a big trigger for me, old ornaments. Um, and I just remember once getting really stuck on my doorway, um, in my bedroom. My parents were downstairs watching TV. It was an evening, so I was meant to be in bed asleep. I don't know where my brother was. He's like 4 years older than me, so he may have been in his room or out with friends or something. And I just remember getting stuck, going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth across this threshold for about 30 minutes. And I just remember sort of breaking down in tears and just feeling like this can't be the normal human experience. That was the kind of words that came to me. Probably not in those words at that age, but it was that something wasn't. This can't be normal. This can't be what everyone experience is. And I wanted to tell my parents. but there was this fear of if I tell them, I'll get locked up, I'll be put in a straitjacket. I'm laughing because that's just not the case, is it? But my 9 year old, 30 years ago, again, our view of mental health was, these mental asylums, we might have called them in the UK, and straitjackets and, whatever it is. And none of that's really true, but that was the fear I had. So I kind of kept my mouth shut. And I guess that's why, historically we called OCD the secret illness because lots of shame. People didn't want to talk about it. I feel that's you don't really hear that phrase anymore, secret illness. I don't anyway, and I think that's largely because it gets talked about so much. Obviously, a lot of the work you guys do at OCD is destigmatizing it as well, and the stuff of Howie Mandel and all of that, and everything else all the other advocates are doing, and just anyone with OCD talking about it does take away that stigma. So I honestly don't think it gets called it that much, but for me at that time, it's very much this secret illness I couldn't tell anyone about. I was quote unquote insane, and I'll get taken away from my parents, and then that would be horrifying as a young kid. So, and then, throughout my early teen years, it kind of morphed between, I still don't know how to describe this, but like, well, lots of tapping a certain amount or counting a certain amount. And the fear was if I don't, where am I going with this? Yeah, if I don't get this right, if I don't tap this right, it was two fears. It was either one, some poor kid would die in Africa. That was my fear at the time. And the other one was I wouldn't be in the same, what am I trying to say? Not universe. Hang on, physics can help me out here. The like parallel universes. I would be with my family still, but something wouldn't be right. That was the fear that I would still physically be with them, but mentally it's almost like I'd crossed over into a different universe. Something would. So it's really hard to pinpoint it, but that was the kind of fear. So yeah, those are the compulsions as well. And then as I got later teens, it morphed into sort of sexual orientation OCD, which is naturally at that age where I'm not sure you're questioning, but those sexual thoughts are coming up. And then I think the OCD just latched onto that. That went on for a couple of years. Um, and that's one that invaded my dreams a lot, which I know can be really hard for people when their OCD kind of then goes in the dreams. Um, and and then then it pretty much throughout my I'll go through my themes and then I'll kind of get to like therapy. So then it was like relationship OCD or dating OCD all the way through my 20s to my mid early mid to mid 30s. Any date I went on, first date was okay, second date was hell on earth because it was like I'm going to ruin this person's life, I'll be trapped forever, I'll be in the wrong relationship, da, 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 all that stuff. Even when I met my wife, I broke after about 6 months. I broke it off because for 6 months I just been flooded with anxiety with her and couldn't. Yeah, it was horrible. Um, Now I'm fine. I don't get any anxiety around her or the relationship. Not to say we don't have our problems, but it's not OCD anymore. Um, so yeah, so that was a big one for me. Real event OCD was the straw that broke the camel's back. That was the thing that kind of made me seek help again. Um, just seeing things in my past that were probably fine, but OCD's rolling over, or maybe grey or whatever it is, but overlaying this sinister tone. That was really hard to deal with. And then yeah, and then now I still get the occasional flare up. It's always around doing harm to others. It might be now as a therapist, my brain wants me to reread emails multiple times to make sure I haven't, said do compulsions instead of don't do compulsions, or whatever it is. It's silly, but that's kind of where my brain goes, and I have to be mindful of that now. But yeah, my therapy journey, when I was 17, again, I still hadn't told my parents at this point. I'd also been using for about 2 years a ton of cannabis to kind of mask, I guess. Well, I was using it also socially, but I think deep down it was also I felt good, when I most of the time I also got really paranoid on it, I should say. But it helped me a little bit, helped in inverted speech marks. And yeah, and then I went to the doctors and, had a couple of assessments. But in the UK on the NHS at that time as well, they were like, yeah, it could be OCD, but we don't want to, uh, but basically go away, read these self-help books. If they don't help, come back and we'll give you CBT. And I was 17. The only book I'd read at that point was the first Harry Potter. Uh, and obviously the books I was forced to read at school. But other than that, I didn't read. So the chance of me reading a non-fiction self-help book was slim to none. I read them all the time now, but like as a 17-year-old, there was no way in how I was going to do that. I bought them though, with the best intention. Anyway, and then I just continued. Oh, I did tell my parents at that point about a year later. And then I continued. I went to uni. Actually, it got a bit better because I think I was so preoccupied. I had a new group of friends. I was playing basketball for the university. I was fully loving that and engaged in that. And my degree, I was loving education for the first time in my life. I'd always struggled. I think largely because of OCD. I always had sort of special educational needs classes to help me read and write better and all of that stuff. But yeah, I struggled all the way through school. Had to write a letter to get in the university, basically begging for them to give me a place, which they did. And I turned it around. I got a 2-1 or a B, which is the first time I'd ever got a B in my entire life. Then went on to do a master's, got an A. So yeah, now had done several masters and enjoy it. But yeah, I really struggled academically. And then when I got into work, it started to get bad again. And then when I was 27, I think I started to get therapy again. So sort of CBT, ACT or ERP ACT. ACT was a really big one for me alongside ERP. And then I did sort of years of sort of non-OCD therapy for other stuff in my life, which helped me too. And then yeah, I've been qualified as a therapist for 5 years now, I think, and trained for like 4 years before that. So that's been my journey as well. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think of anything. Obviously, I really skimmed over all the detail and all the suffering. One other thing I should add is when I was 14, maybe 13 to 15, I started to get what I now think was body dysmorphic disorder. I actually view it for me as my OCD just latched onto my image. Um, and it's even hard for me now to even share what I feel, what I was obsessing about, because that's one area I think I don't struggle with it. I struggle with maybe the historical shame of it is there. But anyway, I would spend hours and hours in the mirror. I grew my hair really long, which you can tell I don't anymore. Um, Shaving my head was actually the big exposure for that. I didn't realize it was an exposure at the time, but it massively helped me. It's 2 weeks of anxiety of what are people thinking of me, all of this stuff, and then that started to really chip away. And there were other things I did over the years, not realizing that it was acting as an exposure. But yeah, I spent tons of money without going into much detail into like certain things that enable my compulsions, and yeah, it went on for like 2 years. And the big difference for me between the rest of my OCD was it was scary, but there was always a like a 20% part of me that was like, yeah, this isn't real. This is, with if we call it BDD, with BDD for me, and this is quite common in BDD, it was like, no, this is 100% real. My insight was non-existent. I was a freak. I was going to die alone. I would never have a job or a partner, or what was the point in living? And it made me really hopeless. And that's one of the key times I've been, quite suicidal, because there was no hope for me. And I think when hope goes for people, it's a really scary position to be in. Um, so yeah, indirectly without knowing it, actually exposure really helped me in that scenario. Um, and yeah, so and then yeah, I was still struggling when I started the OCD stories, which is almost 10 years ago. No, yeah, almost 10 years ago. Because about 3 months before the podcast, I started a not forum, collecting people's stories, written stories, which I don't do anymore. And I just remember sitting on the edge of my bed thinking, well, if I'm gonna suffer, I'm going to struggle, then someone else might as well gain from my suffering. And at least my life has meaning, even if it's shit. Excuse my French. And yeah, and I created it, and the podcast has been huge for me. One, in terms of, I got to interview experts, people with lived experience. I've personally learned a lot from them. It's helped me hugely as a therapist as I was training. It reminded me when I would hear a professional say something or someone with lived experience, they're like, oh, I know that, but I forgot it. I need to get on doing that again, leaning into it, or doing an act skill. It also makes me, same with working with my clients, makes, I don't know, it makes me feel guilty at times. If I feel like I'm telling a client, oh, okay, you need to practice this week, and I'm thinking, well, I haven't been doing that for myself for ages, like I'm a hypocrite. It gives me a kick up the butt to get my stuff together. So yeah, the podcast has been 7 million downloads, or more than that now, globally, which is incredible. I never set it out to be successful or anything like that. It was just, I just remember thinking, one, if anyone listens, that's amazing. And two, it's a chance for me to interview world-class experts and not pay them a penny and get help for myself. So that was really helpful. I think there's something into, it doesn't have to be OCD advocacy, but doing something to help others and do something that you find meaningful in life, because I think this is what acceptance and commitment therapy talks about, knowing your values, taking committed action in the direction of those values. I committed that every Sunday, from about 2 weeks in, I think, every Sunday I will release an episode of the podcast. I haven't missed a single one. When I've gone on holiday, I've had to edit like 2 episodes the week prior to schedule it and get it all done. Or sometimes, several times over these 10 years, I've lost my voice. Luckily, I had episodes recorded, but then I had to spend hours getting my voice good enough where I could get about 3 minutes worth of speaking out of it. I could record the intro, which is why in some of them I sound really croaky. Um, so I'm just saying, like, that, having that commitment, really, for me personally, really helped me, because it didn't matter what my feelings were, how much I was suffering any given week. It wasn't about me, it was about others, and I had to do it. I'm not saying that's going to work for everyone, but for me, that was huge. Um, and yeah, and I practice the skills now every day. Well, I forget sometimes, but every week, whenever I get triggered, something today, I'm pretty good recently, but something today triggered me. Something I said in the session, actually, and that narrative of I'm a bad person started coming in, and I started to ruminate, and for a couple hours on and off, and it started to feel super anxious, and like my life was ruined again, and blah 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 blah. All that story. It's all noise, right? And I just, at some point, I had to say enough ruminating, I'm not doing it, and then practice my skills to let go of it, unhook from it, and focus back in. And now, whenever it's trying to come up, I'm doing the same thing. And I'm sure when I finish this call, my brain will try and pull me in again, and I have to stay firm. I'm not doing it, and practice the skill, and it will go. And tomorrow, I won't care about it. Or if I do, I'll practice the skills again. So yeah, and then I was pretty, I had a good 5 years. I got a bit of time. Last thing I'll say, not last thing on this. How am I going with this? I was pretty good for like 5 years up to 2021, 22. So I had a good 5 year spell where OCD was there on and off in very small doses, but it wasn't bothering me at all. Anxiety was super low for me. And then I just had this, I think it was overwhelmed with work. I'd taken too much on, as well as keeping the podcast going. I had a young kid at the time, she's still young now, but super young kid, um, early toddler, and not sleeping well because she wasn't sleeping well, and you name it. And I'd stopped exercising, and probably wasn't eating the best, and I know I was drinking too much. I wasn't drinking a lot, but my standards, it was more than I should have been. And I think my brain just went enough, and it kind of, I started getting, it's more panic, but I'd be in session with clients, and I would start to feel like 9 or 10 anxiety that I was going to either pass out or have a panic attack in session. And of course, to me, that would be deeply embarrassing as a therapist. And that's okay if a therapist does that, they're human, right? But at the time, it was like, it was horrible. And I did probably, a couple of months of lots of compulsions until I realized this is not necessarily OCD, but this is an anxiety issue. And I'd just been compulsing for 2 months without realizing it. So it still caught me out, no matter how much I know, it still tricked me up. So sneaky OCD is. And then I consulted with a few therapists I know to sort of run it by them, and kind of implemented a plan, or a kind of recovery plan, how to tackle it. And it was quite literally when I would, I'd be doing, I remember one session I was doing ERP with someone, with a client, and I was asking them the SUD scale, where are you on that 0 to 10? And they're like, I'm at a 7. And I'm thinking, I'm at a 9. I want to run out of this room. Yeah, I was at that level where it's just like, I'm going to die, or this is the end of me, or it was horrible. Um, but I got to the point where I was like, no matter what happens, I'm not leaving this chair. I'd rather, so I'd say things out to my brain, like, if you give me as much anxiety you want to give, I'm not leaving this chair. If you want me to pass out or have a panic attack, so be it. I'm not leaving this chair. So that was that kind of response prevention. The exposure was just going into the session every day. And if I was seeing 6 clients a day, for a good 6 months after that, it was horrible. Don't get me wrong, there were moments the sessions were okay, but the first 2 sessions every day were the worst. But it slowly started getting better, and after a year, it was relatively gone. And now I don't get anxious in session, and if I do, there's a very good reason for it. I'm worried about bringing something up with a client or something very normal. Um, but yeah, so just to share, it did come out of the blue for me, but that was because when I look at it, my lifestyle had gone to crap. Like I say, I wasn't eating properly. I wasn't exercising at all. I wasn't sleeping well. I was stressed. I had too much on my plate. So it's no wonder my brain said enough. So since that point, I've taken self-care really, really, uh, really importantly. That being said, I've been really bad with sleep recently, but I've found for me, I need to improve that. But as long as I keep, 4 out of 5 factors going well, whereas before I'd lost track of everything. And I know a lot of people kind of balk, if that's the right word, or roll their eyes at this with this word self-care. But if you drop it, you just increase, in my opinion, increasing the chances of more intense OCD or a relapse. And that's not to scare people, but just to, we're humans. We need to look after the basics. In the same way, if you don't check the oil on your car, and you don't inflate the tires, and you don't make sure there's enough petrol or gas in it, and change the windscreen wipers and whatever else, your car will break down or have problems. We're no different. Um, so yeah, and at the time, so what I did was, after that, so I was doing ERP again. I was doing ACT. I was bringing in a lot of compassion for me at that time, that this is hard in this moment. I can get through it. All of that compassionate self-talk. But then it was, I started exercising again, eating a bit better, slightly cut down on my drink, because I wasn't drinking a huge amount anyway. At that time, I started meditating a lot again, although I've stopped that now. Um, yeah, doing more things, like I started listening to the Harry Potter audiobooks all the way through, because it was like, but other than that, also when I had spare time, I was listening to like podcasts that would help me as a therapist, or just mental health, and that was adding to the stress, instead of, actually, if I've got time, I'm going to listen to a story and unwind that way. And yeah, and I did my best to get more sleep, and which I did actually. I started going to bed earlier. Yeah, you name it. So I think that's the thing I learned. I learned the hard way, to look after myself. Um, yeah. So yeah, but actually, one other thing I'll say, Brenna, is
Yeah.
just on the topic of it, like the importance of sharing your story. There's a few things, like, the podcast. I've had so many people over the years reach out and say, hearing the podcast was the first time they realized they had OCD, which for me is such a gift, because I remember that the first thing I read online, in 2001 or something, that was just a basic post on a website that, detailed OCD, and I was like, this is it. That's what led me to go see a doctor. And yeah, my therapy wasn't straightforward, but eventually I got there. Um, so yeah, I think sharing your story can help others. Wow. So I think sharing your story, and people like NOCD and all the other OCD advocates sharing their story and advocate for OCD, it takes away the shame, which is why maybe we don't call it the secret illness as much anymore, which is huge. So kids, I work with kids all the time. That's I work with 4 to 25-year-olds, and so many young kids come to me now, and they have no shame telling me about OCD, which is so incredible to see. Whereas I think even 10 years ago, there would have been tons more shame. Um, so yeah, and I think also talking about it, it gets more people interested. It gets more researchers interested. So more research is done. More therapists want to train in it because they understand what it is. Um, more companies get involved, i.e. NOCD, and obviously Stephen, the founder. If he had stuck with his shame and hadn't spoken out, NOCD wouldn't exist. And I know you guys are doing an insane amount of sessions now a month, which is incredible because it's improved access for people. Um, yeah, so there's just a few things that come to my mind.
Yeah. Stuart, wow, thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm sure everyone here is going to feel so grateful for you and feel inspired by you. And you really took a lot of your pain and turned it into purpose, which is so amazing. And now you're giving so many others a chance to learn about OCD and learn about other people's stories. And I think that's amazing. I actually could relate to a lot of your stories. I think one thing I wanted to touch on is that you had a lot of different OCD themes.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times people think that they'll just have one theme, or that they're more severe or they won't be able to manage their symptoms if they have multiple themes. So thank you for talking about the different themes. I think a lot of people will appreciate that.
No, my pleasure. Yeah, it flip-flopped like mad. And yeah, it just comes back to that we don't need to take the themes seriously. We're finding the process behind the themes, and that's what we're targeting. Because as soon as we get hooked in the themes, it's kind of game over. We're going to ruminate.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. I totally relate. Okay, now we're gonna head into our Q&A time. So if you have any more questions for Stuart, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box on Zoom, and Stuart's gonna try to answer as many as possible to the degree at which he's comfortable with. So, and I have a few questions at the end too for you if we have time. But let's get started. So someone asked, how do you act on a setback when you feel like you didn't do any progress?
How do you act on a setback when you feel you? I'm kind of confused. You got any idea on that question, Brenna? What
I
that you
think
think they?
I would assume this is like you have a setback in your OCD recovery, or you feel like you're going like heading to a relapse. I guess how do you go about that whenever you feel like you're not making progress in your OCD recovery?
Oh, okay. So I read it as how do you feel you're sort of slipping back if you're not even making progress in the first place. I'll answer it, and if sorry if, to the person asking if I've not got your question. Well, just how do you deal with a setback? I think compassion is the first thing to talk about. That we're human and we have human brains, and brains don't always play ball. And so I might wake up tomorrow and just be in a foul mood. That
Mhm.
could be stuff that I've got going on that day. That could be biological, completely out of my control. So it could be the things going on in my day could be out of my control too. So I think it's just compassion of we're human. This is a moment of suffering, and can I be there for myself in this moment rather than sort of the default, at least for me, was always like, well, panic. This is never going to get better. This kind of doom and gloom, instead of this. Yeah, this is a moment of suffering. I can get through this. It will get better. It's hell right now. What could I do right now that would make it slightly better or a step in the right direction? So the other thing I'd say is in those moments of chaos and crisis, or those months of chaos and crisis, is creating like a little plan of like what's my action plan. And that's something I did in the very early days of my recovery. Was I had a little note on my phone which was like 3 steps, 3 or 4. Like I can't even remember what they were, but it was like based on what I'd learned and in therapy and stuff. Step one, do this. Step two, do this. If in a crisis, basically, because when we're overwhelmed, we're not thinking clearly in our rational brain. So it's going to be hard to recall and remember the tools we've learned or read about. So almost going to a phone you don't need that memory anymore. You just default to the notes, and then that jogs your memory. Okay, I'd step one, rather than we get pulled away with our emotions, and then our emotions are just going to lead us astray. So what was it? There's a quote I like. It's not mine, which is like something like emotions aren't a strategy or hope isn't a strategy. I think it's emotions aren't a strategy. It's something like that, basically saying, yeah, when we get in an emotional storm, we're just going to get carried away with it. But actually, it doesn't matter what emotions we're feeling, what is our plan, and we stick to it. In the same way, a sailor, I'm not a sailor, but a sailor, I guess, they know how to sail and they stick to their direction depending on the weather. Obviously, I'm sure if it gets too severe, then they might change course, but typically they keep going in the direction they want to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if that's answered it, but be kind to yourself is the key one and have a plan and stick to the plan.
That's great. I think self-compassion can be really hard for people that have
Yeah,
anxiety or OCD. Um, we feel like there's a lot of shame with OCD, I feel like, and
yeah,
so that's a great call out. I also love the whenever you're talking about feelings and emotions, think with OCD, sometimes we just can't listen to our feelings and emotions, because it's not rational, either even though it feels real and it feels like we should be able to trust it, it it's OCD, and there's a lot of different like nuances and confusion when it comes to, well, is this real or is this my OCD?
mhm,
And our feelings sometimes exacerbate that. So thanks for touching on that. And
yeah, no worries.
okay, so we've had a couple people ask about relationship OCD. So someone asked, can you please talk more about your experience with relationship OCD? What was it like breaking up and getting back together with your wife?
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, credit to her because she knew I had OCD and she knew I struggled with anxiety and had been struggling over those sort of maybe about 2 months in, she realized, but that I had been struggling with anxiety. And it was actually when we went to visit my parents, we'd gone to the cinema that day, and I just remember being like, max, not max, but really high anxiety, and the point of my anxiety had been really high for 6 months straight. And it was like, I can't go on. Like, I don't want to break up, but equally, I can't live like this. This is horrible, this amount of anxiety. And we got the train back. We were living in London at the time, not together, but both of us separately in London. And we got the train back, and I just remember, I don't know if she asked me or something, and I just remember sort of breaking down in tears, which for me is a big thing because I'm I would like to be, but I'm typically someone that doesn't cry. I tear up a lot, especially if a client says something emotive, but that full kind of release is not something I do. One day I'd love to be able to get to that place and be that person that can do that. But that full release, it takes a close family member to die and me be at their funeral for me to be able to cry like that. So for me to cry on that train, especially when there are people around, not there's anything wrong with that, but in my head there was. And yeah, and then we got to London Waterloo, the train station, and then we went to McDonald's, and which probably didn't help. And what do we say? It's hard to really remember. It was kind of, um, let's not see each other for, I think it was 2 weeks. So it was her idea, let's just give you a break. Let's not see each other for 2 weeks. And that, her being supportive and just hearing me out was was one of the best things she could have done in that moment. Not trying to convince me to stay with her or anything. She just listened and heard me out. And then, 2 days later, I'm like extremely missing her and wanting to text her, and I think I did. And 3 days later, we met up, and at that point, I in my head had been like, I'll do whatever it takes to get through this and find a way through this. So I'd been reading like mad. I'd been, doing whatever to try and figure this out. And when I met her, I was completely calm. Like, it shows you how if she was really wrong for me, I wouldn't suddenly be really calm around her. And then, of course, anxiety came back, and it did come back until we got married about another year and a half later. And I was, ROCD all the way through that. But then after I got married, it was almost like that was for me, I take marriage very seriously. So it was like, well, if I'm married, that's it. So it doesn't matter whether she's wrong for me. I'm not leaving this relationship. That's no judgment on anyone around divorce or anything like that. It's more just I went into marriage with, you know, into the vows. And so I think my brain knew that there's no point in triggering him, telling him this is the wrong relationship because he's not going to leave. Um, and then my brain just shut up around that. It didn't shut up around everything else. But don't get me wrong, there were moments I had little blips, but that was a real key moment for me. And I'm not telling people to get married as a solution to their relationship OCD, but that was huge for me because yeah, I took the commitment really seriously, and that was, I think, a way of showing my brain of like I said in that chair when I was having that relapse of like, do whatever you want to me, I'm not leaving this chair. And I think the brain eventually was like, because the brain just wants to help us. It's not trying to be cruel. It just wants to help us. And if it thinks that you're not going to listen to it and you're not going to act, it's going to go, well, you're not in danger, so I don't need to give you anxiety. And then it will switch it off. Not that quickly, but that's typically the process of ERP. Um, See, when we do compulsions, we keep teaching the brain, I am in danger. Keep giving me more anxiety, which is the trap of OCD. Um, so yeah, but no, it was we didn't fully break up, but it was in theory an arranged 2 week break that lasted 3 days. Um, yeah,
I love that. Thank you for sharing. I think a lot of people will relate to you, and we get a lot of questions and a lot of people wanting to see more relationship OCD content, at
yeah.
NOCD. And so I think a lot of people are struggling with that right now. And
Mm.
so thank you for just bringing more awareness about it. And Stuart, we have a lot
Yeah,
of questions about your podcast too.
cool.
So how about we switch gears? And someone asked a few months ago, back while I was in a PHP, I started writing about my OCD experiences on Substack, particularly scrupulosity, shame, and awareness. I started it in part as a way to process, but more so because I want something good to come out of this suffering. What has it been like to create something similar with the podcast? And how can I get the word out about the Substack so that people can hopefully see themselves in my experiences and feel less alone?
Mm. Well, getting the word out. Look, it takes time. I think we live in this day and age where we want everything right now. I'm not saying this person thinks this way, but generally, lots of people will message me or how can I share my Instagram, or they might ask me to reshare it, and I typically don't because I get so many requests. So it's like, and also I want to see people put in a couple years of work and know they're serious, and then yeah, I'll support you, I'll push you, and so I think it takes time. My podcast didn't get to 7 million overnight. It was a real slow build. Um, of weekly episodes on the same day without fail, that commitment. And I think when you do that, you build an audience. It slowly builds. People start to talk about it, and also, especially, I'm terrible at social media. But if you're on social media, it's like, how can I network with people, other advocates? When people comment on your stuff, make sure you comment back. Comment on other people's stuff, and that's how they get to know you. Like I did that today on someone's post, and they followed me straight away. I didn't do that for that reason to get that follow, but it just reminds me that, yeah, when you engage with others, they want to engage with you. It's called social media for a reason, right? Um, Sorry, my cat's attacking my wife. Um, and yeah, I think so. I guess patience with anything in life. You want to build a business, patience. A relationship, patience. Work, career, patience. Hobbies, patience. I'm learning chess at the minute, right? I love it, but I suck. I lose way more than I win. My ELO, which is the chess score on chess.com, is super low. I would be embarrassed to tell any of you. Um, but I'm having to humble myself and put in the work every day. And I know in a year's time, I might be an okay chess player. And it's no different to building anything. So this person, like, trust in your content, keep speaking from the heart. You're helping people. Focus on the people you're helping. I'm not particularly religious, but I do love that thing in the Bible, which is what is it? Be faithful over few, and you will rule over many. And that was something I used to have that quote in my head a lot of. Just I didn't necessarily want to rule over many, but I wanted to be any two, three people that were listening. I wanted to serve them. I wanted to do right by them. And sure enough, it grew. So yeah, so serve the people that are reading your stuff, connect with others, build relationships. Especially don't jump into people's DMs and just ask to share your stuff. Build a connection with them. Make friends with them, be helpful to them, add value to them, and in return they'll add value to you. So it could be, can I write a guest post article on someone else's blog, or can I write, a long feature for someone's Instagram feed with an image? Can I add value to them? And then of course they're going to plug you because you're building up their stuff. Um, yeah, can you write a Substack on a well-known therapist in the OCD community who's got a big following? They may inevitably then share your article because it's got their name in it. It's about them, an ego. They want to share it, and then your Substack is getting out there. So it's just thinking in those ways. But yeah, patience. Put in the work and patience. You'll get there.
Great advice. Thanks. Someone else asked, what directions might the podcast take going forward, or is that driven by the speakers and what they want to talk about? Thanks for all that you do.
Thank you. It's a good question. Yeah, people like Dr. Stephen Phillipson, who's been on my podcast many times over the years, or Johnny Say, my colleague. They might DM me and say, I really want to cover this topic because it's something they're noticing in their therapy work. And if I like the topic or I think the audience will, I say, yeah, come on. So sometimes it's driven by them because I don't know everything, far from it. So I need others' expertise as well. Um, but a lot of the time, yeah, it's my curiosity. In the early days, I did cover our OCD a lot because I was still trying to figure it out in my head. Yeah, so I think when I started the podcast, it was very much like, where was I struggling? And that's what I covered. Then it became more about, can I be open-minded and cover all different things? Like I covered psychedelics like 8 years ago, way before it was okay to talk about it. And I'm not saying I'm a huge advocate for it, but I was trying to be open-minded. I covered inference-based CBT or IBT back then, 2016, and it only gained popularity in the last year or so. So I always try to be really open-minded, and that's the way I practice therapy. And then it's like, maybe I'm struggling with something as a therapist now with ERP or ACT, and then I think, who could I get on to talk about that? So then it's me trying to be a better therapist. I'm using it, and then people might come to me and say, "Oh, they're addiction and OCD." So then I'll do it. Then I'll cover that. Or I typically at the minute stay clear of themes because other than some nuances, it's relatively the same advice. It doesn't change a great deal. And there's so many different themes. I could do an episode a week for 10 years and still not even covered half of it because it's endless. It's whatever the brain wants to make you fear. That's the themes. So yeah, but in terms of, I guess, for me, my to answer the question, it's just day to day surviving, doing, getting it out each week. That's my only goal. And my application form on the website is closed at the minute just because I've got too many that I'm not getting through at the minute. But that's where people put in their story applications. So I read those and I think, maybe I haven't done much on trauma, let's say, and this person's talking about their trauma, and I say, well, that would be a good guest. Or, I haven't covered sexual orientation OCD in a while. That's really how I cover the themes, actually, is through people's stories. And then the expert ones, a lot of time it might also be other therapists I know who say, oh, you should speak to this therapist. I'll say, okay. Or I haven't done one on medication because I'm not a doctor, for like 8 years. So I've invited an OCD psychiatrist to come on who will be on in the next few months. So I'll cover that again. So yeah, it's really where my interest is, where the audience interest is, and yeah. And I try and be unbiased. Like I don't practice ICBT as a therapist. I've done some
Mhm.
training in it, but I don't use it at the minute. But I still cover it on the podcast
Mhm.
because it's not about me. It's about the
Right.
audience and what they want to hear.
Right. Love it. Okay. Someone asked, when was the moment when you accepted and let the thoughts be? So maybe to build off of that, maybe like, was there a moment in your OCD recovery journey where you decided to just radically accept thoughts, or was it a gradual experience? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I'm sure there was a moment where I fully accepted that this was OCD. I can't remember it, but I'm sure it was there. I reckon if I sat here for 5 minutes, I could find it, but and none of you want to see me do that. The best way I can answer that question is every day. I don't think you can radically accept once and suddenly, I mean, if you could, you'd be quote unquote cured, right?
Right.
Um, and maybe people can do that. You know, I know Johnny Say, my colleague who I work with at the Integrative Centre for OCD Therapy, and I did speech marks here in the UK. And he would say he's in a really good place, but he would say that's because he's practicing his skills every single day, you know, without fail, on and off when he needs to. But for me, radical acceptance, yeah, it's every day. So I said earlier, I think that I said something in a session that started to bring out this story, this narrative that I was this bad person and blah, 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 blah. And I was getting hooked. I was ruminating. It caught me. And I just had to get to a point after suffering for a couple hours where I had to radically accept that I'm not doing this anymore. And I have to accept the uncertainty and accept that maybe I said something that was bad or wrong. Or so I had to make a choice in that moment. And look, in a few days, someone else might trigger me and I might get caught ruminating again for a few hours. And then at some point I have to say enough and radically accept. So yeah, it's a constant thing you have to do, for me anyway. Um, and that's okay because the more you do it, the better you get. Like, to be honest, the reason that caught me out earlier is because I've been really slack in practicing my skills. And whenever last few months and whenever the small bits of OCD flare up, I'm checking a couple times instead of nipping it in the bud. And that builds up to the point where I get to this point where I've ruminated for 2 hours now. I feel my life's ruined and I'm never going to get this thought out of my head. Um, so yeah, stay on top of it. But yeah, it's moment to moment, I think.
Mhm. That was a 10 out of 10 answer, I think, because it's like, it really is every day, you show up every day and small by small, like bits and pieces by bits and pieces, your brain learns that you can accept these thoughts, and you're not accepting the content of the thoughts, you're
No,
accepting the presence of them,
yeah,
which is
100%.
really hard to do.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question actually. So you've had this podcast for 10 years now, right? As
Mhm.
you said, what are a couple of like the most valuable things that you've learned from interviewing people or just putting together the podcast or yourself, your OCD experience, just forming this podcast 10 years ago? What are some things that have stuck with you that are just really valuable to you?
Yeah. Um, so I've got my arm up trying to stop my cat biting my laptop. Cracked the screen on the last one. Uh, well, not entirely. I can't blame him fully, but I always find it hard to answer that from a like, what have I learned from my guests? Because I'm 486 episodes in, right? So it's super hard for me to remember key things. But almost every episode, someone will say something, and I'll be like, "Oh, that's really interesting," or "That's fascinating," or whatever it is. Um, what have I learned?
Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, that's okay. I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is about myself. Just
Mhm.
like, well, one, how stubborn I can be in the sense of the reason it's kept going for so long is because the idea of not quitting, stopping the podcast, it feels like I can't do it. I can't give up something. The longer it goes on, the harder it is to stop. Don't get me wrong, there will be a time I do stop it, but I don't know when that is. So I think that stubborn commitment to weekly, I just learned the importance of that. Actually, sometimes success is just showing up every single day, not every single day, most days, doing your
Mhm.
best, staying committed, being patient, and you know, good things can happen. Like I said, it was never my intention to grow the podcast into anything that was big. I just wanted to do something really cool. Um, but here we are, right? And I think if I'd gone in with the plan of I want it to be massive and da, 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 I would have quit because I think I would have 3 months in been like, no one's barely listening, all of that. Um, so I think it's, yeah, maybe what I've learned is find something you really enjoy and just stick to it best you can. And it's not always going to be perfect because I didn't always enjoy the podcast. Some weeks I can't be bothered to do it or put it out, but I do it anyway because in those moments I think it's not about me. It's about the people that have told me they were listening and it helped them and they made them realize it was OCD, and that's why I do it. Um, in terms of OCD, my understanding of OCD is hugely changed because of the podcast. I think it's been such a help for me as a therapist. It's made me a better therapist. Um, it's taught me also that we know a lot and we know how to help people get better, but there's still so much we don't know. And that's a big learning for me. There's so much still to figure out and explore, and that's what keeps the podcast exciting. How everyone's story is very different and also very similar at the same time. Um, and I think doing the podcast also showed me just how severe and how much it can ruin people's lives. You know, like it ruined my happiness and did take opportunities away from me and did make me extremely miserable. But I was just about able to keep functioning throughout it before I got help. But I know for a lot of people that's not the case. It just shuts them down. You know, they get housebound, lose their jobs, families, whatever it is. And but then again, what I've learned on the podcast is I've had tons of stories like that, but then they're in a really good place now. So it shows you can be in the depths of hell and you can get out of it. That's probably one of the biggest, more hopeful learnings I think from the podcast. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I think hope is one of the best and biggest things for anyone that has OCD and anxiety, honestly.
Oh yeah. If Big Pharma could bottle hope, they would be trillionaires if they're not already.
Yep.
Um, yeah, it's one hell of a drug, hope.
It It really is. I can relate. And Stuart, thank you so much for sharing your story and answering these questions. And a lot of them were, pretty deep questions. And so, on behalf of everyone, thank you for being here and thank you for answering this. You're doing a lot for the OCD community and bringing so much awareness and people together over something that can be really debilitating. As for me, I
Mm,
had OCD. My first memory of OCD was whenever I was 7. And as I grew up, so did my OCD. I feel like it just got more debilitating, and mine were
mm,
in like episodes. So it would come and then it would go. But I
mm,
didn't know it was OCD. And I think that was the hardest part, was that up until whenever got diagnosed at 21, I had multiple episodes before and I had no idea that it was OCD, and to a point where I was housebound and really couldn't get out of bed or function or go to class, do anything. And I randomly one day stumbled upon, funny enough, the NOCD Instagram, and finally was like, oh, wow, this post, that's me. I have OCD. Like what I've gone through, that's OCD. And I immediately, like that aspect of hope, I was like, okay, I'm not alone in this. And secondly, I figured out that OCD can be treated. There's something out there, there's people out there that can help you. And I actually tried talk therapy first whenever I didn't know it was
mm,
OCD, and it actually made me worse. And so whenever I found NOCD and was reaching out to NOCD to start ERP therapy, specialized therapy, I was really nervous because I knew whenever I had tried therapy before, it honestly made me worse. And so,
mm,
but once I got connected with NOCD, the process was seamless. I was able to get matched with a therapist, and it took my insurance. I was able to message my therapist in between sessions. There are support groups, in-app tools, and I feel like my life before and after ERP therapy is completely different. I still struggle with OCD. Like you were saying, sometimes you get little like intrusive thoughts and sometimes you do slip up and do compulsions, but I have the tools in my toolbox now because of ERP that I now know how to face it. And I think that's why I'm just so passionate about it now, and passionate. And that's why I started working for an OCD actually. But if you are like me, if you're listening to this right now and you are housebound, can't function, you're debilitated by your OCD, please know that you can get better. It doesn't have to be like this forever. And we're going to drop a link in the chat actually right now, our team. And if you want to book a free call with our team, 15-minute free call, we'd love to chat with you and you get to learn more about NOCD and ERP therapy as a whole. I'm just saying, I'm proof that there is hope for symptom management and a life that is beautiful alongside your OCD. So I think Stuart can relate to that to some degree.
Mm,
A lot of team members at NOCD can relate to that and have actually gone through OCD themselves. So if you're struggling, know that you're not alone and there's help and resources out there for you. And again, Stuart, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. And I think everyone on this Zoom call really appreciated you and your story and just the OCD Stories podcast, learning more about that. It's a success and just learning how you took your pain into purpose. So we really appreciate that. And it is Mental Health Awareness Month. So,
mm.
all this awareness we're really passionate about again. So thank you, Stuart.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you everyone for listening and listening to the podcast. I appreciate it.
Yep. Well, again, this was recorded and will be sent out to you guys. So if you want to listen to it again, or if you know someone that may be interested in listening to Stuart, um, please send this to them. And we just want to get the word out and just ultimately share that you aren't alone if you're struggling with OCD with any theme, and that there's hope for you no matter how long you've been stuck, no matter how severe you are. It can get better. It doesn't have to be like this. So happy Mental Health Awareness Month, everyone. And Stuart, thank you again for joining. No
Thank
CD,
you.
we always love partnering with you. You're the best. So
Thank you.
um,
Appreciate it.
thank you guys again. And again, book a free call with No CD if you're interested in learning more. And this will be sent out to you guys as a recording. All
Care,
right.
everyone.
Thank you guys. Have a good day.